Welcome everybody to Zazenkai at Blue Mountain Zendo. Today's talk is going to be more of a lecture than a Dharma talk per se. We're going to explore Buddhism's history, both from its conception in India to its migration through China. This will conclude today's part one, and then part two will occur in 2 weeks, and we'll look at Buddhism's migration through Vietnam, Korea, Japan, and then to America. So I'd like to start off by just saying that this lecture is just that. It's a lecture. Its basis is Buddhist history, although it may be complementary to practice, to learn about Buddhist history. But by itself, it's just a mere shadow of the actual occurrences. We can many times become consumed by the past, or consumed by the playful words left behind by our patriarchs and the historical Buddha. However, they will never be it. They will never be even close to it. So many of you have expressed interest in understanding the origins of Buddhism. And I took up this endeavor and humbly agreed to offer a brief introduction into Buddhist history. All that I asked is that you keep to mind that I am not a Buddhist scholar. I am a simple Zen priest. So take what I say with a grain of salt, and as in tradition of Buddhism, look for yourself, read yourself, investigate for yourself. Don't take my word for it. So we begin in between the 5th and 6th century BC. And the world was really in a state of great intellectual and spiritual growth. The Greeks, Hebrews, and Indians, as well as the Chinese, were in midst of a grand spiritual and cultural pulse. The old ways were fading fast, and the days of the republics and tribes were being consumed and replaced by empires and new social structures such as democracy. To get a picture of the time, I'd like you to think back to the climate and the vista before the Europeans settled in America. The Native Americans were divided into tribes, much like the time in ancient India that we're going to discuss. And there were groups of men and women or tribal leaders that ran these tribes or these republics. So this is very much like the time of the historical Buddha. The India was divided, this was before it really was India, was divided into many small republics. And these republics were basically being consumed by these large empires. The Buddha was part of such a tribe or a republic, which was called Kapilavastu. The Buddha and his movement, which is now called Buddhism, but back then it was not called Buddhism. It really didn't have a name, but just a direction. And Buddhism was really a direct result of the revelations and social movements found in this time of ancient India. In around 100 AD, Buddhism found its way into China. And it found its way into China during a period of social unrest and religious decay. So, if we look at Buddhism, we'll see that it's really taken many forms as it's moved through many countries, such as Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Korea, and Japan. However, as this is just a brief exploration of Buddhism, I will be omitting a great deal of information and a great deal of events that definitely did influence the evolution of what is modern Buddhism. So since our tradition is that of Zen Buddhism, I will focus almost solely on its history and omit the other two vehicles and their evolutions. However, I would like to be clear that there is no black and white path here. There is no independent origination of any of these three vehicles. They are all interconnected, and they are all equally important and authentic. My intent is simply to demonstrate the influence and interdependent nature of cultural movements and the evolution and refinement of Buddhism, and in particular Rinzai Zen Buddhism, and the ongoing process of enculturation, which we are now in the midst of in America, where Japanese Zen is becoming American meditation. So let's start. Let's go back to the historical womb of Buddhism in India, a time long ago, approximately 600 BC, but interestingly enough, not too dissimilar from this day and age. There was unrest in the people of ancient India, and corruption had settled not only into the political arena, but also the spiritual one. Politics and religion had become distrusted by the people and viewed as decadent and polluted. Anarchic movements were beginning to emerge, and it was from one of these movements that a new leader was born. And this new leader would change history forever. The Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, or Shakyamuni, the sage of the Shakyas, was born a prince in the Republic of Kapilavastu during the late 5th or 6th century BC. He was born right in the middle of this great spiritual pulse. The inhabitants of the Republic of Kapilavastu were mostly the Sakya clan, a small clan of warriors of the Kshatriya caste, which was a warrior caste. If not for Gautama, we probably would have never heard of this clan. Siddhartha's family were wealthy landowners, and probably indirectly associated with the agricultural boom. This boom was in the Iron Age and was prompted by the invention of iron farming tools and utensils, thereby increasing agricultural production exponentially. This agricultural surplus prompted by this move, by this creation of iron tools, created a move from a bartering commerce to a monetary commerce, one from trade to one of money. This surplus of goods and its resulting wealth created a golden ticket to the upward movement of the newly emerging merchant class. However, even though the merchant class was, as they say, moving on up, they were still bound and limited by the Indian caste system and its gatekeepers, the kings and the Brahmins. This is an ancient story. The wealthy striving to hold on to their wealth and power, and the poor struggling to obtain it. With this being said, this dichotomy is also a common catalyst from which the human spirit finds meaning and its utmost potential. As I said, Indian society was in a state of upward mobility and prosperity. However, this mobility had a catch, a glass ceiling with limits. The human spirit really dislikes limits. Struggle is many times much easier in these situations than acceptance. However, it is this struggle which brings about growth and change within the world. Struggle is needed to refresh both the spirit of the individual and the spirit of the culture. Now, Buddha's family was more than likely indirectly tied to this emerging merchant class. They had extensive land ownership and managed this land. So more than likely they leased this land and collected a percentage or tax from its fruits. So not to get sidetracked on specifics or with the history of Siddhartha himself, the person, the stories of him venturing out of the palace and seeing poverty and suffering side by side is very plausible. India was a very different place than what you see today. Indian land was rich and the population a fraction of what it is now. And although there was poverty there, even the poor lived a relatively well and meaningful life. I would like to point something out right now. I think something that we'll see again and again in Buddhism's evolution. Buddhism's advent was during a great time, a time of economic stability and growth. And we will see these same attributes again in the formation of Buddhism within China, Japan, and then later America. We'll revisit these attributes a little later in China. However, I just wanted to point them out so you pay attention to them and remember them. So let's get back to Buddha's India. So during an outing, the Buddha was said to have encountered a traveling ascetic. Now there was a new uprising of holy men at the time calling themselves Skramana. Now these wandering holy men were not Vedics at all, but they were rebels who challenged the Vedic system and the caste system. They were a thorn in the side of the man, if you will. Now, Skramana means one who quiets passions, or one who strives. And these mendicants challenged the priests of the time and branded them charlatans. The Brahmin priesthood had become decadent and was demanding exorbitant fees for useless rituals and blessings. It would be like me or some other Buddhist monk kind of barging his way into your home, performing rituals which he said that you had to do, and then demanding exorbitant amount of money, whether you like it or not. And this was how the Brahmin priesthood was at the time. And, you know, this just isn't relative or just isn't a result of the Vedic system of the time. We can see this same behavior in almost all religions of the modern time and ancient times. Times of kind of corruption and the imbalance of the actual spontaneous arising of the spirit to kind of bogged down, very religious and ritualized form of practice. So the Skramana were really renunciants and believed that this world, the world of samsara, was illusion and a world of suffering, which required emancipation through ahisma and austeries. Now that sounds familiar, right? We know what isma is, no harm, and we know what austeries is, right? Austeries are kind of very severe, either physical or mental practices that are derived to kind of break the body and mind from attachment to the world of form, to liberate it kind of through fire, if you will. So that's what they saw at the times, and it's also something that we see in early Buddhism. So Gautama, interestingly enough, was probably a part of this movement. And via his renunciation stories of debates, movement away from the belief and worship of God or gods, rejection of the caste system, belief in the abolition of animal sacrifice, asma or no harm, rejection of pop Vedic translations, and distrust of the Brahmin caste. These were all attributes of the Skramanic movement. The Buddha said, "No Brahmin is such by birth. No untouchable is such by birth. An untouchable is such by deeds. A Brahmin is such by deeds." So we can see the massive movement taking place in the Indian culture now. And we can see that in Gautama's time, we can see the beginnings of what would later become the religion of Buddhism. However, please don't think that I'm suggesting that the Skramana movement was what we know as Buddhism now. It wasn't. There were many differences. The most prominent was the Skramanic belief of the necessity of severe austeries. And we know through the sutras that the Buddha has said that these were not required. He had done them himself, and he had abandoned them because all they did was break the body and made the body weak and with the body weak, the mind weak. So he knew that this was not the way. Also, the view of the complete rejection of the world in order to realize or evoke moksha. Now, moksha is kind of a nirvanic state, an awakened or bliss state. And as we know within Buddhism, thinking that one has to totally shun the world or move away from life in the world is not a Buddhist practice at all. So, since we're looking at cultural views, let's fast forward past the Buddhist life about 200 years and look at the first Buddhist emperor, Ashoka. Now, Ashoka has waged war for many years. The one in which he invaded Kalinga was said to have taken a loved one away from almost every man and woman in his kingdom. Now, it was a bloody time in history, and it's strange how Dharma works sometimes. We sometimes carry things to such an extreme that we tear through to its other polar end. For example, we may suffer so much that we break through to the other side, to borrow from Jimmy, and find ourselves in the midst of bliss, merely two sides of one coin. Sometimes it is necessary to fathom that which is unwholesome and painful to truly understand the depth of that which is wholesome. I am in no way condoning anything harmful. I am just making a personal observation on the matter. I have made my fair share of mistakes as well. Getting back to Ashoka. Ashoka was truly an example of a compassionate, wise leader. This was later in his reign, though. He built many monasteries. He started social programs, protected animals as well. Ashoka ceased all predatory foreign programs, sponsored programs designed to bring about positive foreign relationships. He spearheaded interfaith dialogues and protected the freedom of belief and religious practice for all men and women. He spoke and warned of intoxicants and offered places of relaxation and healing, such as dispensaries and parks. Now, Ashoka surely had a hand in the propagation of early Buddhism and demonstrated what a Buddhist government could do and be. I sometimes imagine in our day and age what a leader like that could do. A leader willing to take the same risks and chances as Ashoka did. When will we really get sick, as he did, of war and suffering? I digress here, but I mean not necessarily that we create a Buddhist country, not at all, but just a country based on compassion and the ethical treatment of life. So very simple, but apparently so very difficult. Around the same time, India was actually invaded 4 times in 200 years. It's a lot in a short period of time. Now, the Greeks' invasion of India is one of the most interesting and worth mentioning. They actually invaded India several times, so the footprint they left was pretty pronounced. Buddhism was affected by the Greeks. For example, before their invasion, there was no Buddhist statues of Siddhartha himself, none at all. There was merely symbols such as footprints, a trident, a wheel, or other such symbols. But it was around this same time that the first Buddhist statue emerged. This new symbol took on many of the attributes of the Greek gods and was venerated accordingly. Its use was now comparable to the Greek worship of the Olympian gods. So that's just kind of a neat little tidbit, but worth mentioning, because now within Buddhism, of course, almost every temple has numerous statues of the Buddha, more than likely seated in his awakened position or his lotus position. And this is probably where it came from. It was not a development of Indian culture, but of Greek culture. So after Ashoka's reign, Buddhism really saw a steady decline in India. And as time went on, probably about the 4th century, the Hindu Gupta leadership reinvented the Vedic system into a devotional system, which kind of reinvigorated the Vedic tradition into something that was very approachable by the practitioners of the time. So no longer was it something that only Brahmins practiced and just a normal person would have to go through in order to practice or be in the graces of the gods. One could go directly to the gods and through devotion gather their graces. So it really is what we now see as modern Hinduism. So the Buddha and his story after that was really rewritten by this emergence of Hindu people and practitioners. And it was rewritten that the Buddha was actually one of many incarnations of Vishnu. And that he had really come in this incarnation in order to abolish the need for animal sacrifice and to demonstrate the pitfalls of the caste system and the disgrace of the caste system. So we can see that Buddhism basically fell out of favor in India and was absorbed by the indigenous faith, which was a derivative of the Vedic faith of the time before. So Buddhism kind of faded away. It really didn't stay that popular in India for very long at all. And it was really Ashoka who really made it popular for a very short time in India. But it was kind of absorbed by this new devotional faith. So again, I'm really glossing over a lot of events here and a lot of time, but we're talking 2,600 years of evolution within an hour. So, it's kind of inevitable that I'm going to do that, and there's probably a lot of things that I've skipped over that probably should be in here that I just couldn't fit. So, let's move our attention now to China. So, it's said in AD 61, an emperor by the name of Meng Ti had a vision of a golden man sitting cross-legged with golden rays coming from his head, flying through the sky. And he told the dream to his consultants, and they immediately say, "That's Buddhism. That's Buddha. He came, he came into your dream in order to tell you that you should investigate, Buddhism." Of course, right? You have dreams where golden men fly through the sky and you automatically... So anyway, there's a reason why I say that. Because it demonstrates that even in this time that Buddhism was had been brought to China, because that was the first thing that they said, his consultants. Oh, that's Buddhism. So it had already been there. But, trying to figure out exactly when Buddhism came to China is like trying to figure out exactly when Mahayana was created. It in some form had been there since the beginningless time, but exactly when it came into its state as we know it is really a very gray area. But this AD 61 is kind of where most people fall. So his advisors basically interpreted this vision as a sign that this is Buddha and you need to go to India and bring it back, right? So he sent his emissaries to India, and he said, "I want you to bring back for me, as much information as possible on this Buddha guy that I saw in my dream, and if you can, bring back a priest." So that's what they did. Now, journeys at the time were very arduous. I mean, this isn't nowadays where we jump on a plane and then take a light rail to where we're going. This is traveling, thousands of miles over treacherous terrain and over water, and, so this is kind of a big deal, and to bring back all this information is kind of a huge undertaking. So you can kind of think this was no small thing. This was a huge cultural expedition. So there was a lot of money and a lot of resources that were put into this. So this emperor was serious. He was serious about it. So basically, he got his wish. They made it there, and not only did they bring one monk back, but they brought two. And I was trying to figure out both of the monks' names, and I couldn't find reference at all in any of the books. But the one is Kashap Madanga was his name. He was one of the Indian monks that was brought back. And it's also said too that the emperor had a white horse sent with the expedition to bring back the sacred scriptures. A white horse to carry them. Maybe something to do with his vision or dream, I don't know. But it said that on the way back, all of the sutra and all of the Buddhist holy scriptures were brought back upon this white horse. And when they came back, he actually created a temple for these two monks, and he named it White Horse Temple, after this white horse. It's still in China today. So this is why, people kind of start at this period, because there is some kind of verifiable facts here. So we can see, really Meng Ti's interest here, besides the dream. Buddhism was known in China, as I said before, probably for some time before this. Now, another interesting theory that people have is that China had a habit of invading, outlining Western countries. And after they would invade them and conquer them, they would relocate them into parts of central China. And they would do this to kind of mix the two cultures, so it would become Chinese, kind of breed it out, the outlining exterior culture. But in doing so, most inevitably, we're talking about Western countries to China here, they probably conquered some small Buddhist territories. So if they're kind of, kind of moving these people into China, well, they probably brought a lot of their belief systems with them. And of course, a lot of them would have been Buddhist at the time. So we have this possibility too of introduction into China is through these displaced, conquered peoples. So even though now Buddhism has been in China for some time, it really wasn't until the latter Han Dynasty, which was about 206 to 220 AD, that Buddhism really began to take front stage. The Han Dynasty was a time of great economic growth, just like we found in India before. However, towards its end, it was also a time of great unrest by the people. The religious and cultural systems of the time had become corrupted, and the rulers of the time were held in contempt, the Confucian rulers. And remember, I told you to watch for these same attributes that we saw in Buddhism's inception in India, these same conditions that arose. We may think that Buddhism was kind of as spontaneous as it was in India and China, because really, if it wasn't for China, Buddhism would have died out. But it wasn't. It wasn't at all. It was kind of really a hard sale. Buddhism had a lot of things that kind of were contradictory to Taoist and Confucius beliefs. But it did address several issues that Taoism and Confucianism kind of skirted around. One is that there's suffering in life. That we suffer. It's just part of life. And they just kind of always skirted around it. Like, even though you're doing what you're supposed to and you're upholding the relationships you're supposed to, you're still suffering. So they could never explain exactly why. Why is suffering a part of life? The second is the place of the individual within the world. Couldn't do it. because it's a cultural, it's a societal belief and structure. So the individual kind of was not focused at all and was seen as kind of menial and non-important. But, as you know, I mean, you're important to you and your place in this world. Imagine if there just wasn't an outlet for your individual beliefs or expression. Just wasn't there, couldn't do it. People looked down on you if you did something that stuck out. And we can see the same behavior in Japan even to this day. So the Chinese culture and the Chinese beliefs really make Chinese grounded people. And they are grounded in kind of the immediate or the natural, in nature, just by their beliefs and philosophies. So the world of form and kind of societal relationships are really of the highest concern of the Chinese people. Not these lofty ideas or complex philosophies, not the idea of what's going to happen after we die, but kind of real concrete things, one being, of course, the government and society, and the other being relationships and the environment. So kind of very grounded, and still to this day the Chinese people are kind of very grounded in the immediate and don't spend a lot of time in kind of the abstract world, but kind of reside much in the concrete world. And to understand really why, and it's important to understand really the evolution of Buddhism as well, we have to look at Taoism and Confucianism just a little bit to understand the Chinese mind and the Chinese culture at the time when Buddhism migrated to there. So Taoism is really the belief that some people say it's not a religion, it's more a philosophy. The same thing with Confucianism. They say it's more of a philosophy than a religion. The same thing that we say, some people say that Zen or Chan really isn't a religion but a philosophy. So again, kind of very nebulous, not necessarily definable by our idea or immediate concept of religious or religion. So it's a belief that the more that one aligns their life with the Tao, the more one becomes a man or woman of Wu Wei. Wu Wei is kind of what we call Buddhism, a man or woman with nothing to do, nowhere to go, one that is content and fully immersed within the moment. So we could kind of simply say that the more a person lets go of their struggles, the more a person lets go of worry, concern, of afterlife and meaning and all of that, the more that one person enters the Tao or the Wei and becomes this person of Buddhism. And basically, the more we align ourselves, of course, the more peace, happiness, and something that is very important to the Chinese people, and especially Taoist, is the extension of one's life. It's a very important theme within Taoism. By following Taoism, it's said that one extends one's life, even to the point, and we'll talk about it in a minute, to something called the elixir of immortality, which is like the fountain of youth, with the Chinese for many hundreds of years sent expedition after expedition trying to find, which kind of really irked a lot of people, taxpayers, that were funding these expeditions that the emperor was doing, and they always kind of came back empty. So Confucianism now, Confucianism is really a system that's based primarily on relationships. And not just relationships, but the responsibility of those within the relationship. Now these relationships actually originated from 5 bonds, right, or 5 interactions. Ruler to ruled, father to son, husband to wife, elder brother to younger brother, and friend to friend. So these were the Confucian relationships, and everybody fell within those relationships, and everybody had a responsibility to uphold them. That was the practice of Confucianism. So these 5 bonds, like I said, were based on something called Ren. Ren is a responsibility, a kind of birth responsibility, to uphold these relationships. It was called Ren. And the disharmony or harmony of the social relationships were tied directly to the adherence to these relationships and responsibilities of the individual. So the individual affected the greater society, and the society affected the individual. They were interlinked. They weren't separate at all. It was seen as one kind of giant world system, the order of things. So, and this went from kind of, you know, the friend relationship all the way up to the ruler, and everybody had their own assigned responsibilities. And if they didn't uphold these responsibilities, then the state would kind of fall out of grace, and everybody would become unhappy because there was no longer balance or harmony. So there's a Confucius scholar by the name of Hu Yin, and he was about 1098 to 1156. And he said, "Man is a living thing. The Buddha speaks not of life but of death. Human affairs are all visible. The Buddhist speaks not of the manifest, but of the hidden. After a man dies, he is called a ghost. The Buddhists speak not of men, but of ghosts. What man cannot avoid is the conduct or ordinary life. The Buddhists speak not of the ordinary, but of the marvelous." So we can see in this Confucian scholar their contempt for Buddhism, that it was lofty, that it was fanciful, and that it did not address the concrete, what was right in front of you, but kind of wasted time on other things. So now this doesn't mean that they didn't have their own beneficial ideas or beliefs of what heaven was, of what the Chinese word would be tian, or heaven. Because they did. There was actually responsibilities and relationships with the people and the heaven as well, the heavenly realm as well. So you could kind of say that the highest form, or tian for a Confucian, would be the perfect balance and the perfect adherence to the responsibilities found within relationships. So it's very much like a Sukhavati. It's very much like a Pure Land, but it's right here, right now, and it's through the perfection of these responsibilities and these relationships that it comes about. It's kind of heaven on earth type of thing. So it's not something after death. It's not something, somewhere else, some other realm. It's very concrete. As I said, the Chinese are very concrete people. So you can see now, how a belief system based on the rejection of the world of form, viewing that all things are really empty, and that the belief in, a monastic life is one of the highest expressions, could be a really hard sell for a Chinese or the Chinese culture. I mean, it kind of goes against a lot of the things that they stand for, as we just talked about. So it'd kind of be like this, a young male going out into the world would say, hey, yeah, well, Mom, I'm quitting my job, shaving my head, dropping out of society, and oh yeah, life is marked by suffering. So you could see that, this trend would raise a few red flags in China, because a lot of these things that Buddhism taught were kind of against the grain of Confucian belief. Even the idea to cut one's hair is a travesty, is what you would call a sin, because it seemed that mother and parent gave us this form, this body, and any kind of desecration of it, including cutting one's hair, was a violation of your responsibilities in that relationship. So every single one of those points, even cutting hair, raised some eyebrows in Confucius life. And the other thing was, bloodlines and their continuation was of the utmost importance, to the Confucian. That was their vehicle for immortality. Remember, the Chinese were very, very grounded, right? So not fanciful ideas of reincarnation and all of that, but I live on through my prodigy. I live on through my children. That was their immortality. That was of the highest or utmost in importance to a Confucianism, man or woman, was the continuation of their bloodline. And they believe that it can only be done through the harmony of the Confucian relationships and responsibilities. So without a male heir to run the family, the Confucian parents really begin to worry. Even to this day, they worry if they don't have a male child. Now, you got to remember that the Confucius family is very patriarchal. It's very kind of revolving around the male figure, and sometimes very much to the extreme. An elder son is really responsible for all the family affairs, continuation of the lineage, keeping property in the family, and presiding over ancestral rights. Because if you have a woman or a girl in Confucius society, you have to pay somebody to take her. So the assets actually move to a different family. So for the Confucius, this idea of a male heir really is important. And if there's no male heir, the other thing is they believe, who will take care of me in my old age? Because one of the responsibilities within the relationship between son and parent is that you are responsible for their care in old age. Not only are you responsible for their care in their old age, you're responsible for their memorials and their remembrance. And if you don't do that, then the relationship with that person or those people and the heaven realms becomes out of balance. And they believe that, in the afterlife that they'll, be unhappy and become kind of a hungry ghost. So we can see now too, the preference for boy babies over girl babies is still found in Asia right now. I'm sure all of you. And that's really what it's tied to, is this belief that without a male child, that the line will not continue, the bloodline. And that's a travesty, the bloodline ending of, for the Chinese, the Chinese Confucians. So, you can imagine in India there was a lot of movements that arose trying to eliminate Buddhism from, infiltrating the Chinese. But the unrest of the time, the distrust of the philosophies and the rulers kind of opened up a door that could not be shut. Because you heard me many times talking about zeitgeist or the great movement of a culture or a society. Well, this movement, the zeitgeist of China at the time, was one that was ripe for the roots of Buddhism to be planted and to take hold. So it really was, after a couple hundred years and a lot of hard work from a few, that Buddhism really meshed well with the Chinese culture. And the way that it did that is it absorbed the Confucian emphasis on responsibilities and relationships. And it did this by developing monastic offices and by putting emphasis on the responsibility of the various monastic offices. And we still see that Confucian influence today. Even in this zendo, we see that we have offices, even though they may be kind of scattered and not so clear because of the size of the zendo. We can still see these offices like Tenzo and Jisha. These are all offices, these are all responsibilities and relationship based. And if we look at a classical Chinese or ancient Japanese culture, it's way more pronounced. Where everybody was dedicated to their responsibilities based on the relationship, from the teacher's responsibility to the students, to the student's responsibility to the other student. All of this was emphasized greatly, and this was due to Confucius' time. And Taoism offered its own influence into Zen, and it may be a little bit more visible for us to see the Taoist influence. But it really developed and offered the spontaneity and the kind of grounded nature that we find in Zen Buddhism today. Very oriented in the now, in the moment, instead of a lot of early Buddhism, which was very lofty and otherworldly and talked about, you know, like Theravada of just looking forward to future rebirths because it was kind of too late now. You know, because of this Chinese influence, we can see kind of a tradition that becomes grounded in nature and now, in the immediate. And this was the Taoist influence on Buddhism in China. That would later go to mature to become what we know as Chan and then Zen. So Confucianism and Taoism are really responsible for many positive outcomes. However, with any kind of structure, any kind of man-made structure, imperfections are intermingled in there, and soon we find the decay and the corruption of these systems.